All right, welcome to Unit 7. Unit 7 is going to be on finding distance. And the first thing we're going to do is find the distance between 2 points, cut that in half, and the point right in the middle there is called the midpoint. So target 1 is finding a midpoint between 2 points. And what we know about a midpoint is that it's going to be the same distance from both of the endpoints. So here's a picture of a graph with point A and point B. And the point in the middle, we'll call M, that's going to be our midpoint. And you'll see a formula there for how to find it. But before we get to the formula, I want to talk kind of about where that comes from a little bit from a different perspective. Something that you're used to doing is figuring out what your grade is in a class. And so I'm going to go down here to test averages. And let's say that you started off your math class this semester and you had a couple quizzes. And the first quiz you got a 65 on. Okay, quiz 1, and the second quiz you got an 85 on, and I want to find the average. So what is your score in the class right now if you just had those 2 quizzes? Well, what you guys are used to doing is adding those 2 up and dividing by 2, and if you had 3 quizzes, you would add them up and divide by 3. But 65 plus 85 gives you 150, and 150 divided by 2 gives you 75, and so we would say that the 75 is your test average. You're just, anytime you add 2 numbers and divide by 2, you're finding an average of the 2 numbers. Well, that is what the midpoint formula is showing. The x1 plus x2 divided by 2 is showing you the average of the x values. So x1 in the graph and x2 in the graph are going to be in different spots. It doesn't matter if they're positive or negative. If I add those 2 numbers together and divide by 2, that gives me the average distance away from 0 that they are. Because what x1 is it's just a number of how far away from 0 on the graph a point is. And x2 is a number how far away from 0 on the graph a point is. And so if I take the average of the x's, I'm finding the middle number, or the number that's the average distance away. I can do the same thing with the y values. So y1 and y2 talk about a vertical distance away from the x-axis. And so if y1 is a couple of units away from the x-axis, and y2 is so many other units away from the x-axis is down here. If I take those 2 distances and I add them together, those 2 values, and divide by 2, I'm finding the average of the y values. If you think about the formula in that perspective, it makes it very easy, or easier maybe, to memorize the formula that to find midpoints, we're going to add the x's and divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2. You're finding the averages of the x's and the average of the y values. So here's an example that we did in class. CD, C is at 1, -6, and D is at 7, 5. And we want to find the midpoint of that segment. So I'm going to draw a segment here. So there's segment CD, and I want to find a point somewhere in the middle of that point. And so if I do the idea for the midpoint formula, writing it as a point, so I have this big parentheses with some space to do some work, I'm going to take the x values, 1 plus 7, and divide by 2. So both x's added together divided by 2, because that gives me the average of the x's. Do the same thing with the y values, -6 plus 5 divided by 2. That gives me the average of the y values. So 1 plus 7 is 8 divided by 2, and -6 plus 5 is -1 divided by 2. And so I can write this as 4, -0.5. That would be M, my midpoint. And if I look at that on a graph, 4, -0.5, it does look like it's in the middle. And actually I can do a little bit more than just say it looks like it's in the middle. I could probably count over and say that from this point right here, the midpoint, I could go over 3 units and up 5.5. I could also go over 3 units the other direction and down 5.5. And all those distances would be the same. So I know that M is in the middle. If you want, you can pause the video here and try to find the midpoint between 4, 7 and negative 3, 2. I'm going to add the x's together and divide by 2. So 4 plus negative 3 is negative 1, so negative 0.5. That's my x coordinate. My y coordinate is going to be 7 plus 2 divided by 2, which is 4.5. So my midpoint is negative 0.5, comma 4.5.